My name is Ed Thompson. I'm 68 years old, my hair more silver than not, and my hands are thick and rough from over 40 years of holding saws, chisels and planes. My whole life has been wrapped up in the little woodworking shop at the edge of our small town in upstate New York, where the scent of fresh-cut pine and the low hum of the planer have been as much a part of me as my own breath. The house I live in now isn't just some structure. I built it myself more than 3 decades ago. Every beam, every floorboard, every nail carries the sweat of my labour and the love of my late wife, Margaret. She's been gone 10 years now, and in her absence, I've held onto this home like a lifeline. It's where our son Michael took his first steps. It's where Margaret planted her rows of petunias every spring. It's the one place that has always been mine, in a world that changes whether you want it to or not. After Margaret passed, it was just me and Michael, though just me became the reality pretty quickly. He built a life in the city, and I learned how to fill the silence. A couple years back, he and his wife, Ashley, moved in, saying it was to keep an eye on me. I'm not naive, I knew better. Michael's construction work was never steady, and Ashley had expensive tastes that didn't line up with their income. She's the type who knows how to make her voice sound warm and friendly, but you can see the calculation behind her eyes if you look closely enough. They've been here ever since, half playing the part of the caring family, half living rent-free while their credit card balances ballooned. The night it all crystallised, I'd just finished dinner. I was still at the kitchen table when the landline rang a sound you don't hear much anymore. I picked it up and heard Ashley's voice. "Dad, Mike and I have been talking," she said. "Syrupy sweet. We think it might be time to move you into a retirement community. You know, just so you're safe. What if you fell and no one was here to help?" Before I could answer, I heard Michael's voice in the background. He must not have realised the call had already connected. "Yeah, and the house will fetch a fortune now. Prices in this area have gone crazy. We could get ourselves a condo downtown close to work. No more driving out here." Ashley laughed softly. "I already checked with a realtor. We can get close to 600,000 for it. That's enough to clear our debts and buy in the heart of the city." Michael didn't hesitate. "Perfect! We'll get Dad into a standard home, nothing fancy. That way we save more to invest." I sat there, the receiver pressed to my ear, feeling like I'd been carved open with one of my own chisels. Every polite question over dinner, every plate of food waiting when I came in from the shop, every little, "How are you feeling today, Dad?" It was all groundwork for this plan. Quietly, I placed the phone back in its cradle before they realised I'd been listening. That night, I sat in the old wicker chair on the porch, the same one Margaret used to love, staring at her smiling face in the framed photo on the mantel. There was a slow, steady burn in my chest, not the kind that fades when you sleep, but the kind that stays, smouldering. This house isn't just a piece of property. It's the place where Michael played in the yard as a boy, where I stayed up late finishing orders to make sure the bills got paid, where Margaret and I weathered every storm life threw at us. And to them, it's just a pile of lumber and shingles they can trade for cash. Sleep didn't come easy. The ceiling fan creaked above me. The crickets outside sang their endless song, and all of it blended into a rhythm that beat alongside my anger. I thought about the nights I skipped dinner, so Michael could have enough for the school trip, the years I worked double shifts to pay off the mortgage, the way I emptied our savings and borrowed from my brothers so he could have a wedding that wouldn't embarrass him in front of Ashley's family. People forget where they came from once they've lived comfortably for long enough. The next morning I played it cool. I made a fresh pot of coffee, swept the porch and stacked the woodpile out back. Ashley wandered into the kitchen, scrolling her phone, mumbling a half-hearted morning without looking up. Michael had left early, saying he had to check out a job site. I watched him walk down the drive until he disappeared, and I told myself, if I don't protect what's mine, they'll take it all. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Let them think I'm just an old man who doesn't know what's going on, too slow to keep up, too trusting to question their kindness. But I would start planning, quietly and carefully. When the time came, they'd see I wasn't nearly as easy to manipulate as they thought. I sat down at my workbench that afternoon, hands moving automatically over a piece of cherrywood I'd been shaping, but my mind was elsewhere. I was running through options, thinking about property laws, about how to keep control of my home. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let the place Margaret and I built together become just another line item in Michael and Ashley's bank account. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about not letting them decide when and how my life should change. And so, while the hum of the planer filled the shop and the smell of sawdust drifted through the open door, I began to map out my own plan, one that would give me the final say. And maybe, just maybe, remind my son that the man he's underestimating is still the same one who built him a life from nothing. I kept the same routine the next few days, moving through the house and shop like nothing had happened. I still brewed my coffee at sunrise, still took my time sweeping the porch, still sat out front in the evenings with a paperback in hand. But every word from that phone call replayed in my mind like a recording I couldn't erase. It didn't come in sudden stabs anymore. It was more like a slow-turning drill, grinding down into me. I knew that if I reacted too quickly, they'd change their tactics. They'd paint me into a corner, maybe even try to get me declared unfit to make decisions for myself. No, if I was going to win this, I needed to be deliberate. The first step was getting a clear picture of my legal standing. That afternoon, I told Ashley I was going to town to pick up some supplies. Instead, I called my old friend Bill Harris, who drives a cab out of town. He's the kind of man who knows everybody and doesn't ask too many questions. I asked if he could take me to see someone I knew, a former apprentice from my shop years ago. A kid who'd learned how to smooth a joint with a hand plane before he could even drive. His name was Tom Callahan, and after he left woodworking, he went to law school and eventually opened his own practice. When I walked into Tom's office, he broke into a grin and came around the desk to shake my hand. "Mr. Thompson, haven't seen you in years. Still remember how you taught me to fit dovetail joints without a jig?" We sat, and I told him not everything, not the part about overhearing that call, but enough. I said I was worried my son might try to sell the house before I was ready. Tom asked to see the deed. I pulled it from the folder I'd brought, and he took a careful look. "It's in your name only," he said. "No co-owner, no lien besides your mortgage, which you've already paid off. You've got full control. No one can force you to sell unless you sign it away." That eased something in my chest. Tom leaned back in his chair. "If you ever did want to sell, I'd recommend you do it quietly, to someone you trust. Don't let the wrong people get wind of it, or they might start making trouble." I left his office with the first real sense of clarity I'd had since that phone call. I knew then that I had options, and more importantly, I could choose how and when to use them. That night, I went through the old oak desk in my study, the one I'd built myself the year Margaret and I moved in. The drawers were full of memories I hadn't touched in years. The scarf Margaret knit me the winter we couldn't afford to run the heat high. The Polaroid of us in front of the house, with Michael grinning gap-toothed between us. The spiral notebook where Margaret kept our budget when money was tight. I ran my fingers over the ink, the indentations her pen had left. These weren't just keepsakes. They were proof of the life we'd built from scratch, proof that this house was more than walls and wood. And I wasn't about to see it stripped down to a check and a handshake. The next morning, I called another former apprentice, Nick Larson, who now ran one of the biggest custom furniture companies in the state. Nick had made good for himself, supplying high-end homes and resorts. When I told him I was thinking of selling the house, he looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "If you sell, I'll buy it," he said. "No questions, no haggling, and I'll keep it as is, won't tear it down, won't gut it. I want to preserve it, Ed. It's part of the history that made me who I am." That hit me right where I needed it. I could live with that, letting the house go to someone who understood its value beyond the market price. We agreed to let Tom handle the paperwork and close the deal within a week. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances at home. I still ate dinner with Michael and Ashley when they were around, still asked polite questions about their work, still nodded along when Ashley mentioned how property values were climbing. Inside, I was counting the days. I started setting aside the things I would take with me. The ceramic coffee mugs Margaret bought at the county fair. The framed family photo from the summer Michael graduated high school. My well-worn woodworking tools, planes, chisels, mallets, all of which still felt like extensions of my own hands. Everything else I'd leave. Let it be part of the past I was ready to walk away from. Finding a new place was next. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere away from curious neighbours, and certainly away from Michael and Ashley's reach. After asking around discreetly, I found a small one-storey house at the edge of the woods, just 3 miles from town. The owners, a young couple, were moving to Chicago for work and were happy to rent it long-term. The place wasn't big, but it had a fenced yard, a small garden plot, and a covered porch that faced west for watching the sunset. I paid the first year in cash and asked them to keep my name out of any conversations. Over the next few days, I started moving in small loads. A few boxes of books, my tools, some clothes, and the little things that made a place feel like home. I fixed the sagging screen door, oiled the hinges, and built a simple set of shelves for the kitchen. By the end of the week, the place smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh coffee, the smell of my life. Michael and Ashley didn't suspect a thing. They were busy with their own plans, coming and going at odd hours, barely offering more than a distracted, "How's it going, Dad?" when they saw me. I'd answer in kind, never letting on that I was building an escape hatch right under their noses. I knew that once the sale went through, there'd be no undoing it. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be about the money changing hands. It would be about me drawing a line they couldn't cross, about proving that even at 68, I still had the power to choose my own path. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I'd sit on the porch of the new place with a mug of tea, thinking about the look on their faces when they realized the house was gone and there was nothing they could do about it. Not because I wanted to hurt them, though I can't deny a part of me wanted them to feel some of what I'd felt, but because I wanted them to finally understand that I wasn't theirs to manage or to move around like a piece on a board. The pieces were in place. All that was left was to wait for the right moment to flip the board entirely. The sale closed on a Tuesday morning. Tom handled the paperwork with the same precision I remembered from his days cutting joinery in my shop. Nick wired the money straight into my account. No questions, no delays. We shook hands in his office and I told him, "You're not just buying a house, Nick. You're holding onto a piece of my life." He nodded, and I believed him when he promised to keep the place exactly as it was. By noon, I had moved the last of my things into the little house by the woods. It felt strange lighter, in a way knowing the old place wasn't mine anymore, but also knowing it was safe from the hands that had been itching to cash it in. I decided I wasn't going to tell Michael or Ashley anything. They'd find out when they found out. And when they did, there'd be no arguments, no pleading, no, "You misunderstood us, Dad." The truth would be right there in the locked doors and empty rooms. 2 days later, I set up a small security camera in the eaves above the porch of the old house Nick didn't mind. He even let me use his Wi-Fi until I could watch the scene play out. I wanted to see their faces when they realised what had happened. Not for spite, though. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious, but because I needed that moment as proof to myself that I'd followed through. It was a Friday afternoon when their silver SUV pulled into the driveway. I was sitting in my new kitchen, sipping coffee, watching the live feed on my laptop. Ashley stepped out first, sunglasses perched on her head, hair perfectly styled, looking like she'd just come from a salon. Michael climbed out from the driver's side, hauling a black duffel bag. They both looked relaxed, almost smug, like people returning to something they thought was theirs. Ashley dug through her purse, pulled out her house keys, and strode up to the front door. She slid the key into the lock, turned, and nothing. The key wouldn't budge. She frowned, tried again, harder this time. The metal clicked uselessly in the lock. Michael stepped up. "Here, let me try." He took the keys, jiggled them, applied more force. Still nothing. "This is weird," he muttered. "The lock's been changed." "Why would Dad change the locks?" Ashley said, irritation creeping into her voice. "He's never done that before." Michael glanced around the porch, like the answer might be hiding in the shadows. Then he stepped back and walked around the side of the house. I watched him vanish from the camera's view, only to reappear a minute later, his jaw tight. "Back door's locked too. Garage door won't open." Ashley pulled out her phone and dialed the landline. I smiled faintly. I'd had that number disconnected a week ago. She tried twice, her expression darkening with each failed call. She finally tossed the phone back into her bag with a frustrated sigh. Then Michael saw it, the white envelope I taped to the front door. In my neatest handwriting, I'd written, "To Michael and Ashley." He tore it down without reading the outside, ripped it open, and began scanning the letter inside. I'd written it carefully, the way you might sand a tabletop until it's smooth enough to run your palm across without catching a splinter. In it, I told them I knew everything the plan to sell the house, to park me in a budget facility, to keep whatever was left. I told them the house had been sold to someone who would never hand it over to them, and that my life was mine to direct, not theirs to arrange. I didn't write out my anger. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. On the screen, I saw Ashley lean over Michael's arm to read along. Their faces changed in unison. First confusion, then shock, then the tight-mouthed anger of people who've just realised their game is over. Ashley's voice rose first, sharp and high. "He sold it and took all the money?" Michael didn't look at her. He must have found out. About everything. Ashley spun toward him, eyes narrowed. "You're the one who brought up the nursing home. Now what? We have nothing. Do you understand? Nothing. Michael's voice sharpened. Don't pin this all on me. You were counting the money before we even made the call. She crossed her arms, her jaw trembling with a mix of fury and panic. We have the bank breathing down our necks, Mike. How are we supposed to pay them now? He didn't answer right away, just stared at the letter, like it might change if he looked hard enough. Then he crumpled it in his fist and muttered, We'll figure it out, somehow, but the house is gone. He's cut us off. From my chair in the little kitchen by the woods, I watched them sink down onto the front steps. The smugness was gone. The easy confidence had drained away, replaced by something raw, the look of people who've just discovered the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they thought. Ashley buried her face in her hands. Michael rubbed the back of his neck and stared off at nothing. I sat there, not gloating, not exactly. What I felt was relief. For the first time in years, I had chosen my own course without bending to what they wanted. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the wind through the trees outside. I poured myself a glass of the homemade apple cider I'd been saving and raised it toward the framed photo of Margaret sitting on my counter. We kept it out of their hands, Maggie, I said quietly. It's not ours anymore, but it's not theirs either. And that's enough. Somewhere out there, Michael and Ashley were still sitting on that porch, surrounded by a house full of memories they thought they could claim. But now it was just a building they had no key to, no rights to, no way back into, and that was the turn of the screw I'd been working towards since the night I picked up that phone. In the week after Michael and Ashley found themselves locked out of the old house, the phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, not even one of Ashley's carefully worded, just checking in messages. I heard from a neighbour that the day after they discovered the locks changed, a moving truck pulled up. They'd spent the morning hauling out whatever they'd left behind in the garage, boxes and bags stacked haphazardly in the back. By afternoon, the truck was gone, and so were they. Someone else in town mentioned seeing them at a budget motel near the highway, and later renting a small apartment in the next county over. I didn't ask questions, I didn't need to know. My days at the little house by the woods settled into a comfortable rhythm faster than I expected. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, the air crisp and filled with the sound of sparrows in the pines. I started planting a few herbs in the raised beds, outback rosemary, thyme, a patch of basil. By mid-morning, I'd head into town to help out at Nick's shop. He didn't need me to work, but he insisted on giving me a small paycheck. You're more than a consultant, Ed. You're part of why I'm here, he told me. I only accepted enough to cover my basic expenses, putting the rest aside for donations to the local food bank or small repairs for neighbours who couldn't afford them. Money was never the point. The work kept my hands steady, my mind sharp, and reminded me that I was still capable of making something people valued. About 10 days after the porch incident, Michael showed up at Nick's shop. I was sanding the edge of a cherrywood tabletop when I heard the bell over the front door. I looked up to see him standing there, shifting from foot to foot, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice lower than I remembered. "How've you been?" I set down the sander and wiped my hands on a rag. "I've been fine. You?" He glanced at the floor. "It's been rough. Ashley's job hours got cut, and I'm still waiting on a new project to start. We're behind on the rent already." He looked up at me then, his expression, a mix of frustration and something I hadn't seen in a long time, humility. "I was wondering if maybe we could stay with you for a little while, just until we get back on our feet. I let the silence hang between us for a moment. "Michael," I said, "I'm not going back to living under the same roof, pretending everything's fine while we're playing games with each other. I'll help you find a place to stay. I'll even cover the first month's rent if you need it. But here? Number?" His jaw tightened, and for a second I saw the flicker of the old defensiveness. But it faded just as quickly. He nodded once. "I understand." I gave him the address of a small rental complex just outside town that I knew had vacancies, told him to mention my name to the manager. Then I picked up the sander and went back to work. He lingered a moment longer, like there was something else he wanted to say, but in the end, he just muttered, "Thanks," and left. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun slip behind the trees. I realized I felt lighter. I had said no to my own son. And instead of guilt, there was only the steady certainty that I'd done the right thing. Boundaries, I was learning, weren't walls to shut people out. They were fences to keep the right things in. From then on, the tension that had hung over me for years started to dissolve. I didn't hear much from Michael or Ashley. Every once in a while, Ashley would send a short text, something like, "Hope you're well," but it came without the usual undertone of expectation. I replied politely, "Nothing more." I'd spent too much of my life mistaking manipulation for care, and I wasn't going to fall into that again. I filled my days with things that actually mattered to me. I reread the old woodworking manuals I'd collected over the decades, not because I needed to learn anything new, but because the feel of those pages and the smell of sawdust on them reminded me why I loved the craft. I built small pieces jewellery boxes, picture frames, and gave them to friends or donated them to the church fundraiser. Sometimes I'd walk into town on Saturday mornings to the farmer's market, buy a loaf of fresh bread, maybe a jar of honey from the beekeepers who set up their stall at the end of the row. People there treated me like a neighbour, not a burden. One afternoon, a young couple came into Nick's shop to order a custom dining table. The wife recognised me from years back. "You built my parents' kitchen cabinets," she said with a smile. They still talk about how solid they are. Moments like that reminded me I'd built more than just furniture in my life. I'd built a reputation, a thread of trust woven into the community. That was worth more than any house or bank account. Of course, there were still moments when I thought of Margaret. On rainy days, I'd cook a pot of chicken soup the way she liked, with wide egg noodles and plenty of thyme, and I'd eat it slowly, almost tasting her laughter in the steam. I kept her photo on the kitchen shelf in the new house, right next to the tin of tea she'd bought in Boston all those years ago. Some nights I'd catch myself talking to her picture about the day's events, and though it might have looked like the habit of an old man, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I never told Michael how much money I'd made from selling the house. It wasn't out of spite, it just wasn't his business anymore. My life, my resources, my choices. That was the lesson I wanted him to absorb, whether he admitted it or not. By the time autumn rolled in, the little house by the woods felt entirely mine. The porch boards had darkened from weather and use. The garden was thick with herbs and late-blooming flowers, and the workshop corner of my shed was stocked and ready for winter projects. I'd even added a rocking chair to the porch where I could sit with a blanket over my knees and watch the deer graze at the edge of the trees. I'd started to understand something. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of control over your own life. And I wasn't about to hand that control back to anyone, family or not. The first frost of the season came early that year. One morning, I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and saw a thin layer of white clinging to the grass, the herbs in the garden drooping under its weight. The air had that sharp, clean smell that only comes when the world has been rinsed overnight. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and sat down in the rocking chair, watching my breath cloud in the cold. Life had slowed into something steady and deliberate. Each day started and ended on my own terms. There was no knocking at the door, no footsteps upstairs that didn't belong to me, no half-heard conversations laced with ulterior motives. Just me, the hum of the kettle in the kitchen, and the wind in the trees. It had been nearly 2 months since I'd last seen Michael. The only contact came in short, infrequent texts. "Hope you're okay," or "thinking of you." They were polite but distant. I replied with the same tone. Maybe he was still angry. Maybe he'd accepted it. Either way, I'd stopped expecting a resolution that looked like the family we used to be. Some breaks can't be glued back together without the cracks showing. I didn't hold hatred for him or even for Ashley. They'd made choices selfish, short-sighted ones, but they were still choices. And choices come with consequences. I'd made my own share over the years. I'd been too trusting, too willing to believe that sacrifice guaranteed gratitude. It doesn't. If you give without boundaries, people will keep taking until you've got nothing left to give. That was the real lesson I'd learned. Love without limits isn't noble. It's an invitation for others to treat your life as theirs to manage. I'd spent years thinking that by giving Michael everything I could, my time, my labour, my savings, I was securing a bond that couldn't be broken. In reality, I'd been teaching him that my needs came last. Selling the house wasn't about money. It was about resetting that balance, about saying, this far, no further. One Saturday, I went into town for the farmer's market. As I was leaving with a bag of apples and a loaf of fresh bread, I ran into Mrs. Dalton, who'd lived across the street from the old place for 40 years. "I saw your boy the other week," she said, adjusting her scarf against the wind. "He asked if the new owner would ever sell it back. I told him probably not." She looked at me closely. "You okay with all that?" I smiled faintly. "More than okay." And I was, because the house was never the point. It was a symbol of my work, of my marriage, of the years we'd built something solid from nothing. But symbols can be passed on, preserved or let go. What mattered was that I chose how it happened, and that it happened before someone else could strip it away. Back home, I spent the afternoon in the shed, working on a small tea chest for Nick's wife as a thank you for the holiday dinner invitation they'd extended. My hands moved with the ease of muscle memory, cutting dovetails, sanding edges until they were smooth as glass. As I worked, I thought about Margaret. She'd always been the steady one, the one who reminded me that a home isn't the walls, it's the choices you make inside them. I think she'd have approved of what I'd done. She'd have seen it for what it was, not an act of spite, but of preservation. In the evenings, I'd sometimes take out a notebook and write down bits of my story, not for publication, not even for anyone else to read, just for me. I wanted a record of the moment I stopped being afraid to enforce my own boundaries. If Michael ever came around, if he ever asked why I'd done what I did, I'd have the words ready. A few weeks before Christmas, I ran into him at the hardware store. We spotted each other almost at the same time, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then he walked over. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was calmer than the last time. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him, searching for any sign of the defensiveness I'd come to expect. There was none, just a tiredness in his eyes, and maybe a little humility. "I appreciate that," I said. We stood there for a moment in the aisle, surrounded by shelves of screws and paint cans. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Finally, he said, "I get it now. About the house. About boundaries." He shrugged. "We're figuring things out on our own. It's not easy." "It's not supposed to be," I said. "That's how you learn." He nodded, and we parted ways. I didn't feel a surge of reconciliation or some grand emotional swell. Just a quiet satisfaction that maybe, just maybe, the lesson had started to take root. On Christmas morning, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the snow drift down in lazy spirals. A small wrapped package sat on the counter, a set of new carving chisels I'd bought for myself. For the first time in a long time, I'd given myself something without wondering if it was selfish. Somewhere out there, Michael and Ashley were having their own holiday, in a smaller place, without the comfort they'd once assumed would always be there. Maybe they were talking about me, maybe they weren't. It didn't matter, because my life was mine now, fully and completely, in a way it hadn't been for years. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone who asked about my story, it's this. Don't ever assume that age makes you powerless. Don't let the people who claim to love you decide where you belong or how you should live. Gratitude isn't automatic, and trust, once broken, rarely goes back to the way it was. But dignity, that's something you can hold on to, no matter what. In the end, freedom isn't about what you own or where you live. It's about waking up in a place you chose, living by rules you set, and knowing that your life is yours to steer. I had to lose a house to gain that understanding. And if I had to do it all again, I wouldn't change a thing. This story is not simply about a house or money. It is about dignity, boundaries, and the courage to take control of your own life, no matter your age. In life, there will be moments when even the people closest to us act in ways that test our trust. Sometimes it is not open conflict that hurts the most, but the quiet plans made behind our backs. It is in those moments that silence can become dangerous, turning into an open door for others to take what matters most. Ed's choice to act calmly, to prepare in silence, and to protect what was his, teaches us that love and trust must always be balanced with self-respect. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out. They are fences that protect what is valuable inside. If we don't set those boundaries, we risk losing not just our possessions, but our peace, our freedom, and our sense of self. The story also reminds us that letting go is not always defeat. Sometimes giving up something tangible like a house is the price of reclaiming something greater, the right to live life on your own terms. As the old saying goes, better to lose gold than to lose face. True wealth lies not in what you own, but in the freedom to decide how you live. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you care about? How did it change your life? Share your experiences in the comments. Give this video a like if the message resonated with you, and subscribe so you won't miss more powerful, thought-provoking stories like this one.